Yeah! Excellent. Fantastic. My name is John Siuntres. I host a podcast called Word Balloon. And one of our panelists has actually been on the podcast, but I'm very excited to be here today for John Siuntres, the Mego Stretch Hulk, presenting the Psychology of Wolverine. And this is going to be great because let's get really into the psychology, the psychoses of Logan. A very complicated character that started with this gentleman, Roy Thomas, a legendary comic book writer and editor who was Stan Lee's first successor as editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. He's known for co-creating some of comics' greatest characters, such as Wolverine, Carol Danvers, Morbius, The Vision, Iron Fist, and Ultron. He introduced the pulp magazine heroes Conan and Red Sonja, along with the sci-fi fantasy Star Wars, to Marvel Comics. How about that? Also, Roy has had lengthy writing stints on Marvel's X-Men and Avengers, and at DC Comics, the All-Star Squadron and Infinity Incorporated, among many other titles, books, and a couple of movies, like Fire and Ice. Big fan.
Yeah.
Right?
You're the guy that saw it, right?
Absolutely. Come on, man. In 2011, he was inducted into the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame, and currently edits the comic history magazine that I get every time there's a new issue, Alter Ego, and also works with Stan Lee on the Spider-Man newspaper strip, Mr. Roy Thomas, ladies and gentlemen. And also joining us, and forgive me, psychiatrist or psychologist?
Psychologist.
Psychologist, thank you. I know there's a distinction.
Yeah, but if I could prescribe medications, I'd be way more popular.
We'll have to talk about that. All right, that's good. Who wrote The Psychology of Wolverine? Dr. Suzana Flores. So this is, man, I think you picked a pretty complex character, to write a book about Suzanne. So tell me about what intrigued you about writing a book about Wolverine.
Well, to be very forthcoming, I was not raised a geek. I recently became one, and I'm in. Now that I'm in. It occurred a few years ago during a time when I was sexually assaulted. And I'm just putting it out there because it's an important topic to talk about. And, a lot of people assume that psychologists, that, we don't experience the same level of trauma as other people just because we understand human behavior. And I'm here as witness to tell you that is absolutely not the case. During that time, it was very difficult for several reasons, not just the trauma, but also the judgment from society, and they experienced firsthand how people love to blame the victim. And I just felt numb. I think that was the worst part, is the numbing. Because before then, I was like South Side of Chicago girl. I was, tough, opinionated, in your face if I needed to be, and I lost myself completely. And then I ran across a panel of Wolverine from the Dark Phoenix saga, where the Hellfire Club. And he's in the gutter, and he's covered in dung, and he beaten in battle. And still, he had his, adamantium claws out, right? And then it was the sneer, right? The sneer, of I'm going to get them back, right? Like, you've taken your best shot, suckers, and now it's my turn. And something just kept bringing me back to that panel. Like, I, put it away. I think I saw it at a comic book store, like I just saw it, and I come back. And I said, okay, there's something here, like some mythological pull. Or something, because obviously, and I don't believe in coincidences in terms of inspiration, so I looked at, like, okay, who is this guy? And of course we know some things with the movies or so, but I was not that familiar with the character. And then the more I researched, the more I realized, wow, like, okay, that panel of him in the gutter, that was me. I was there. And, sorry, sometimes it just still hits. Trauma has a way of sneaking up on you sometimes. It just, when people say, like, when are you completely healed? I'm like, any day now. But, so he was raw, and he was damaged, and so was I. And from then on, when I researched him, I realized that I think people think that he's a very simple character, and he actually is very complex because he mirrors our realities in so many different ways. And in this case, for me, he represented the need that I had to get angry. Like, not just a little angry, pissed off. Like mutant pissed.
Yeah.
Okay, and I went off on whoever I needed to go off on. And it was a matter of me proclaiming my truth, and I needed to fight back. And I was not going to win a legal battle, and I didn't care. It was a matter of I am going to make this as painful as I can or prolong it because I am proclaiming my truth. And win or lose, that's what Wolverine taught me, is that sometimes in life things are not okay, and we have to listen to our anger to remind us of, who we are and what we stand for, and that's not to be compromised. And learning to live with post-traumatic stress myself, the disorder myself, while treating patients, and just realizing that just like Wolverine, we're all perfectly imperfect. We're all damaged in some way. And so that was the beginning.
Wow. Now, Roy, when you...
Yeah, follow that.
Well, I want to take it back to the beginning because now Len Wein and Herb Trimpe did the first story in art, but I know that the concept of Wolverine began with you, and I want to hear that story. But when you hear that, because so much has been built from the foundation of where the character started, were you thinking about a psychologically damaged character when you were conceiving Wolverine?
No, I mean, I'll take whatever credit I feel, I'm deserved, and I don't want, and I owe it more. All the heavy lifting on the character, after its basic concept was done first by, John Romita designing a costume.
Okay, sure.
Earlier. Len was the writer that I asked to do it because he had the Hulk roaming around. I thought it would be easy for him to get up to Canada and to do a story there, which he did very quickly. And of course then Herb Trimpe is the artist who actually had to take that one drawing or so of Wolverine and make it, because later on other people added. Dave Cochran brought in like a face, because John Romita didn't design a face on him. And Cochran used the face of another character who I guess had been called the Wolverine that he had showed me before. It had no connection with the thing I did. It was some character he had made up for DC.
For the Legion of Superheroes?
Yeah. It meant nothing to me because, I knew what a Wolverine was since I was like 5, I was always interested in animals. And also I thought about, well, I'll tell you what happened. What happened is that we're doing all these books. This was, I guess, 74, it was long before I quit as editor-in-chief, and it suddenly occurred to me one day that we had, I don't know, 5%, 10%, whatever of our readers, certainly several percent were up in Canada. They read English, they were there close, they got some of our comics. And, we should have a Canadian character. I had already made up for X-Men, with the artists, of course, the Banshee and Sunfire, with Irish and Japanese backgrounds. But I thought, we should have a Canadian character. So I called Len in. And I said, if Len hadn't been available or, something, or somebody else been writing the Hulk, he would have been the person or whatever. But Len was like, one of the couple of very best, writers in comics, so it worked out very well that way. And I called him up and I brought him in and said, just 4 things. His name's Wolverine. I thought about calling him Badger. I wanted an animal that lives up in Canada. What am I going to call him? The moose? What I finally decided was not, I didn't remember the name of, the character that Dave had, but the thing is that, or else I wouldn't have thought of the Badger, but the thing is that a badger, as a verb, just sounds like somebody's annoying you. You're badgering somebody. It doesn't have that right sound, even though the badger's a very first creature. And Wolverine, nobody knew what that was either. John Romita said that when he saw the name, he thought it was a female wolf, and he had to look it up. But I liked it because it sounded like wolf. Anything that sounds like wolf. Wolf is a good word for a character. So Wolverine was good. So I just said, I wanted him to call the Wolverine, they dropped the doll later, but that was the original thing, and he was Canadian. And Len had done Brother Voodoo, another character concept of mine, a little, not quite as memorable as Wolverine. And I liked the way he had done the accent for that character, that Haitian character. Of course, he gave a Jamaican accent, but it still was an accent. So I said, you can do a Canadian accent, and so forth, which I guess meant putting the word A in. And the other two things, which Glenn kind of forgot, and he sort of rediscovered the wheel by himself, but I told him, I said, he's got to be short, because Wolverine's a small animal, which I like, because all the heroes are all 6 foot something tall, and I wanted a hero that was shorter or same height as me, say, or something, there weren't that many of those. So, and the other was that he would be very fierce, because Wolverine was noted for attacking animals several times in size, and with that I sent it off to Len, and everything else was either done by Len, with the artist, or else a little later, after just a couple of stories by Chris Claremont, who really developed the character the most. I forget, myself, whether it was Len or what, so some of them gave him I didn't tell him, give him claws specifically, or let alone adamantium claws.
Okay.
I'm happy he did, since I had also created adamantium, so it was nice. But that was strictly either Len or Chris, and it was probably Chris in conjunction with Dave Cockrum originally, and later John Byrne, but especially with the early days with Cockrum, that developed that character out to what he really became, the breakaway star of the X-Men. And one of Marvel's, I'm happy to say, even though I don't own a piece of him or anything, one of Marvel's, handful of most popular characters. But, as I said, it was other people that did it all. I just my job was to kind of get things going. It wasn't even to create characters, but once in a while when I had an idea, I would either do it myself or get somebody else to do it. And that was basically it. But I'm afraid that, it would, unfortunately, Len and her are no longer with us, but, they were the ones that, really got it going.
It is interesting that, as you say, it started from Dave Cockrum drawing for the Legion of Superheroes. So there is Timberwolf, who's very similar to Wolverine.
Yeah,
but
I don't think it started from that drawing at all.
Oh.
But I just think he did it first.
I saw it.
And I saw it, but I saw like 10 characters.
Okay.
And as I said, when I started from the thing, I started thinking just animals, and I thought of Wolverine and Badger and Moose and maybe a couple other animals. But what Dave did later was, when Wolverine takes off his mask, he gave it the head, I think, that he had for the civilian version of Wolverine. But of course, that had nothing to do with his creation, because, he didn't have that then. But that's the thing, you start creating things. Some characters have one creator. Bill never created the Submariner. Nobody else. Probably Carl Burgess created Human Torch. I sort of say Bob Kane and Batman. That isn't true. and Dr. Bolton and Wonder Woman. That's not true. But a few things have one creator. But mostly often they have 2, or in the case of some, 4 or 5 or 6. And with Wolverine, you'd have to have at least 3 or 4 before you could even. I got annoyed when I think they left Herb Trippy's name off of the Logan movie.
Yes,
I
noticed that too.
I was really annoyed.
Absolutely.
Because the guy who did, and yet when they got Luke Cage on Netflix, they give George Tuska a credit, and his role in Luke Cage would have been exactly what Herb's was.
Sure.
The characters had one drawing, and then do that story from a plot.
Absolutely.
But they do the best they can with these credits. It's hard to. And, it's hard to figure out who did it, because if you ask, everybody did it.
Well, and it was a group effort, and in fact, because of that, there was always this mystery about Wolverine, and for decades, that was part of the intrigue of Wolverine, was he didn't know his background, and we didn't know his background. And Suzanne, I want to know from you as well, because I love the book, I read the book, and it's fantastic, because it really is a hand-in-hand examination of Wolverine's personal psychoses, but reflected through the comics and in the films. And, Paul Jenkins was given the assignment back in the early 2000s to do the origin story. And that was very controversial, and I remember the controversy, and I've even interviewed Paul about said controversy as well. So, well, both of you, and Suzanne, we'll start with you first, was it helpful that there was a clear origin? Because again, for us, a lot of times as the fans, the mystery was always part of the intrigue. So
I'm very grateful that the origin story was written, because as a psychologist, we always go back to the childhood, right? We're like, tell me about your mother, right? Or in this case, the emotionally absent mother, which led to what we call complex trauma. Where you are repeatedly either ignored or neglected by a primary parent, and your self-esteem is of course affected, your sense of trust your fear of vulnerability. This is probably something very familiar, right? The need to distance yourself from people when they get too close, that is complex trauma. And the memory loss, we call that dissociative amnesia. So we had a name for all of these things, but everything began to make sense. And so Paul Jenkins was one of the first people, was the first person that I interviewed. I got connected with him through a friend, Elliot Serrano, King of Geeks of Chicago. And so he and I started talking about why we were both drawn to Wolverine, and the answer was simply pain. We both experienced, pain in some way, but again, who hasn't? And so I just did want to share that interesting part, because he was very kind and very supportive, and he said, so you're sharing your story? And I was like, like psychologists are not supposed to do that. And he said, it humanizes you. And it's literature and reality in the sense that Wolverine is afraid of vulnerability, and right now you need to conquer yours. And I said, okay, I will if you will. And he had his own story, and he's like, oh, so we kind of agreed to share our stories there. So yeah, I'm very grateful the origin story existed, because it added to the explanation of why Logan is the way that he is, and also why perhaps he's attracted to redheads, right? Rose O'Hare, right? And why he goes after... Huh? And why he goes after perhaps the unattainable is safer, right? So we can get to the women.
Yeah,
we'll get to the women,
absolutely.
and what each of them represents to him.
Sure. So Roy, when and again also as an editor, and these pieces of Wolverine's history were added to, the story and everything. Was it great that he was a man of mystery? Was it great when they finally decided to?
Well, you have to remember, by the time the Wolverine comic came out, and then 6 months, a year later, the giant-sized X-Men, which was like his next...
So
I was gone.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I had left being editor-in-chief, and although I almost came back, I ended up not. So basically, that was really, out of my hands.
Okay.
I paid for it. I only I read a bunch of X-Men back in about 1983 or so, when my then writing partner in movies, Jerry Conway, and I were writing an X-Men movie script for Orion that never got made, and the people that were doing it, they wanted to change it in ways that I didn't think were right, but they were smart enough to keep Wolverine in it anyway. So then at that time I went back and was reading the material that been drawn by Cochran and Larry Byrne, and I read that and so forth. And I found they'd really done some nice things with that character, and it's interesting to see. Of course, then I would sporadically see that something was doing something weird, like Frank Miller with his taking to Japan,
yes,
and all that.
Yes.
That became the base of the second of the Wolverine movies and so forth. But it was interesting that you got a good character, I guess, that we all made up together out of pieces. When it's open to that kind of interpretation, because all these characters, I guess Batman may be the supreme example, they're all like Rorschach tests or blots, eventually you get enough writers and enough artists, and everybody wants to have his own interpretation, and if the editors allow that, encourage it, and the audience encourages it, as they have in recent years, sometimes it gets a little weird. Like, I think it's like there are at least 15 or 20 Batmans now that would not even recognize each other in the same room, I sometimes think. Wolverine, I think, is, and this is the approach I prefer, I think is always Wolverine.
Right.
And there's a bit of respect for what the character was, and it's built up. But they haven't yet yielded, as far as I know, to the temptation. The usual temptation is for the egotistic creator to come in and say, everything you know about character X is wrong, but I'm here to tell you what it really is like. When you do that, you're in the presence of an egotistical idiot who will not tell you the definitive anything, but he may still do some good work.
I love also, and we will get into the women, but as far as the Howlett family, Sabretooth's role in Wolverine's formation of his character, and the mind tricks that Sabretooth over the years has been playing with Wolverine. I'm your father, I'm your brother.
A lot of gaslighting.
Very, very, and now I'm blanking, Chinatown. If you will.
I just saw the movie, so I'll let her come.
I think in terms of that formation, a lot of it had to do with Paul Jenkins and his brother. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, that's a little
Wow.
preview, right? And so we started talking about the nature versus nurture argument. You know, how could two brothers that grew up in the relatively, similar household end up so different? And again, I don't want to divulge too much, but he just remembered that his family struggled financially, and they were always at the bottom of the hill. And so he switched certain genders, like the grandfather, the surly grandfather was actually his grandmother, and other things. But it talked about feeling like an outcast, and feeling like a reject, and feeling like you have to prove yourself, and the psychological toll it took on two brothers, and how they ended up in different places. And that's when I told him, Paul, you have to let me share this. You must let me share this. You have to. And I'm glad he did.
That's excellent. This can be a group therapy session, so if you would like to chime in with questions as we're discussing, I'm happy to open it to the floor as well, or the three of us can talk. So seriously, consider that as we move on. But also, all right. So we mentioned briefly Logan's women.
Yes.
The women that fascinate Logan, the women, both the attainable and the unattainable.
Yes.
And that, again, great part of your book is you kind of go down from Rose to Jean, and Yuriko is, I always get her name wrong, so Mariko is, I keep confusing her with the other Japanese character.
Yuriko.
Yuriko and everything. But yeah, so talk about the loves of Logan.
Okay, the many loves of Logan. So I talk about triangulated love, and not to be confused with love triangle. So it talks about like how you need, like love, trust and commitment and sex, of course, right? And so, I had to do an analysis of what each character meant. And I knew I was going down a dangerous road, right? Because, I was like, okay, picking who is the love of his life. Is it Jean or is it Mariko? And I make an argument that, in many ways, Jean represents his strength. She's a fellow mutant, the most, arguably, one of the most powerful mutants. And so I think she represents his strength and his mutation, but I think Mariko represents his vulnerability and his willingness to experience that in order to better himself. Like she makes him want to be a better man. And so there's a difference between infatuated love, right? I'm not, in my book, I don't say like he doesn't love her. He loves her. He loves Jean, yes. But it's an infatuation. It's a love that has not come to fruition. And you do wonder, like, if these two actually did hook up, right, would they last? And I think Jean is a very, like, rational, reasonable person. That's why she chooses Scott. Because Logan is not a safe bet. He's either gonna hurt you, or he's gonna stab you in the bedroom accidentally. And so, he's a little bit of a liability. And she understands.
Foreplay is fine.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. If it's a short-term thing, no problem, right? And I think there's always been chemistry between them. Like there's always been that connection. But I think she makes a decision based on her head instead of her heart. And so yeah, she's very near and dear. And in terms of the movies, you could see that he was just never the same after. That Jean character died, and so, but I think that he finds new life through Mariko.
Roy, I'm glad you mentioned the movies because, as you say, when the character was originally created, he was meant to be this small, little, unattractive guy.
And yet, he didn't have to be unattractive. He just had mean.
All right, small, mean guy.
Yeah.
And I know you're a pulp guy. More of a Monk Mayfair.
Yeah.
Than a Doc Savage.
And I think Willoughby had in mind a favorite character. He was a minor character in DC, but a character I always loved as a kid, probably because I was small. The Atom.
Sure.
Of the Justice Society, who later did become atomic powered. He was always a tough, mean kind of guy. He wore this kind of these leather pants, brown leather pants. It was like a girdle almost, and he didn't have any power, but he was a mean little guy.
Well, trained by a boxing trainer and everything.
There was and so forth. And of course, I didn't really know that when I was growing up. He just appealed because he was small and strong, and everything. And the other favorite character of mine, another one I used to play when I was a kid, was Doll Man.
Sure.
He was like 8 inches tall. He's giant compared to Atlee later.
Of the freedom fighters.
And the Doll Man character and things like this. But So I didn't really, but I obviously Hugh Jackman is not alarmingly sharp.
Yeah, let's talk about this, because then we get Matinee Idol, Hugh Jackman. Hey, great Logan. Don't get me wrong.
Right. I just quickly forgot the whole shark thing. Wasn't that important? He's still smaller than a lot of the other X-Men and Colossus and some of these other characters. He's still not huge in the size about it.
Yeah, actually, I think he's kind of, maybe now 6 foot tall, yeah.
He's 6'2".
Yeah, but the size.
I mean, I've never met him, I don't know.
But still, the
That's
size of it
usually
wasn't
what
an important thing. That wasn't what you usually thought about. It was the size of the
Sure.
appearances. Really, that you'd think of the size of connection with some characters like Thor. But size isn't what you think of when you think of Wolverine, even if he's played by a 6 foot guy.
It's all about size.
Have you enjoyed the X-Men movies, Roy?
Yeah, mostly, Apocalypse to me was like too much like a cartoon villain on a Saturday morning cartoon. But I do generally like the movies. They're so complex sometimes, not if you're not a regular reader of the books, it's a little hard to follow, and of course it's going to veer off in its own direction. But, I'm not going to quibble with what was the real first Marvel superhero, success and so forth, and the fact they made a number of the movies, or with what, Glenn, Chris, and the other guys did with the comics and so forth. It's an amazing accomplishment, and even after the larger part of 2 decades, it's still a going concern, and now leading to more things in the future. So I think it's great.
I'm disappointed that we won't see Hugh Jackman's Logan interact with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because that's a great opportunity. I can appreciate him feeling like, all right, it's time to go. But, Suzana, what do you think of, because again, I'm glad that you explore both the comics and the films.
Well, as I got into this world and started, the research, and then the first thought that occurred to me was like, I have like 40 years of research to do, and I'm like, what did I do? And of course, I knew the movies first, but I experienced what a lot of X-Men fans experience when they first see the movies. So I'm like, wait, that's not right, and that's certainly not right. My husband's like, stop. It's not right. Look, it's incorrect. Or so. I enjoyed them too. I think Hugh Jackman definitely brought Wolverine. And the aspect I think he brought best was the vulnerability. Like he made Wolverine very likable, and you cared about him. You felt compassion and empathy for him, and he really exemplified the suffering. Like how he is a tortured soul in many ways. So no, I definitely enjoy the films. I agree about the Apocalypse stuff, but I do.
You're lucky the X-Men was canceled for a few years there, or else you'd have it ignored.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Luckily, I had a lot of help.
Any questions from the audience? Or we did, sir?
How do you feel about Logan as a bookend to that portrayal of the character?
Yeah, I'd like to hear
The
it.
continuation of that common theme of anyone who really gets close to him, anyone he loves, comes to a bad end.
I thought the movie was superb. I loved the ending. I cried like a baby. Because in order to write this book, I had to really imagine that this person was real. So he was real to me in order to write it. And to have that excruciating, very painful ending was hard for many of us. I love that the struggle continued, the inner conflict continued, and Magneto absolutely was still right in many regards. The oppression is still there, and mutants are never seen as equals, and they're still hiding or such. But those that are the newer generation. But I think that my favorite part was the ending where. Everyone's seen it, right? I'm not going to be okay. Like that would really suck. Where he had to let that vulnerability go. Like he had to work through it. That's what he means to me, is that it is resurrection, if you will, through suffering. It is healing through suffering. And at that moment, he saw Laura, and he left her that legacy of don't become what they made you.
And also, he dies on his back covered in blood with tar in his hand.
Which is very close to, it was foretelling, right? Like, you know, there's blood everywhere, you have your heart in your hand. It was very beautifully done. I think the part that got me even more than the death itself was when Laura grabbed the cross and she, I'm getting choked up now. She turned it over to an X, you know, because he was the last X-Men. And at that point in the theater, I'm like, it's enough, right? But it was true, he was. And that was more appropriate for him. I think the movie did it justice. I think that it, this long road that Hugh Jackman had, he ended it beautifully, very beautifully.
What do you think of the X-Men, or the Wolverine movies, Roy?
I liked all the movies. The last one was definitely probably the high point. I probably don't quite remember it as well, you know, maybe because I saw it just as another movie. I enjoyed it. I was eating my popcorn and sitting there. You know, I always go to theaters like, I go in some like Monday afternoon. It's always like a private screening usually, even though it's a popular movie. I enjoyed it tremendously. I thought it was it was the first, R-rated?
Yeah, well, Dark Knight.
Of the Marvel movies.
Oh, the Marvel movies,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, you're right, technically Deadpool, but...
Yeah.
Fox, exactly.
Yeah.
But, so I thought that, so I like that.
I guess I
but
Fox.
I probably, you know, just didn't, you know, don't remember it quite as well. I saw it, I've seen a lot of movies since, but I intend to, you know, watch it again one of these days. I just haven't got around to it, but it was an excellent movie.
Stan always said that, you know, Stan Lee always leaned on the fact that, you know, mutants were substitutions for minorities and some of the problems and stuff. Was that evident in the 60s and 70s?
Nah.
Yeah, honestly, Roy, and I appreciate you saying that because, truthfully,
I don't think,
I'm glad that it grew.
I'll tell you the thing too, I think it was there from the beginning, but I doubt if, you know, Stan and Jack, because they both worked on lots of it, I doubt if they really ever consciously thought, except, of course, you know, it's the human condition, so you're naturally, you know, when you start building a character and you're trying to get human emotions, it's going to come out, and whether they actually physically thought, they did sort of think about the outsider, but I don't think that they were necessarily thinking about, you know, like the civil rights connections per se, or something real close. But again, you know, it was still, things were in the air. If they had created it 2 or 3 years later, probably it would have been more so. But, you know, it's still something that they were aware of. And the whole idea of the outsider has been endemic to a lot of superheroes, from Submariner and Batman on. And so they just took it and did it. I don't think that was Stan's main motivation. But once he did his version of it, and once Jack started drawing and adding to the plot, they all put it together, it was there from the start, and it had to be there to start because already, just about, 3 or 4 years in, when Stan was finished the run, they had become conscious enough that they did the Sentinel storyline, which as far as I'm concerned is almost the only really good X-Men stuff. I mean, I like the whole series, but the only thing that really to me stands out as really exceptional storyline in the entire series is, you know, that Stan and Jack did before they turned it over to a lesser guys like me. And believe me, it kind of plunged as far as I'm concerned, because, you know, we didn't have the initial inspiration, was the Sentinel storyline, because by that time he realized that it was about bigotry and things and forth, and it was, you know, it was, you know, made very clear in that story, and so, which means that it was kind of partly there, and on the one hand, they kind of, by then, they sort of consciously recognized it and decided to really play with it, and they really, you know, did it with a bang.
That's cool. Suzana, what did you, and not to put you on the spot, given that he's right next to you, but have you read Roy's run on X-Men, Roy and Neil?
Roy and Neil,
Roy and Neil Adams, Roy Thomas and Neil Adams.
It doesn't have
I have to read
They
it.
cannot have.
Yeah, I don't think I have.
Okay.
Well, when I started out, it was just kind of imitating Stan and Jack, except without Jack.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a difference, you know.
Sure.
And but it was still okay. But I don't think I was too inspired, nor with a couple of people who did it after me. The lucky thing that happened was that Stan asked me. The sales were, you know, they were kind of soft, and so he eventually asked me to come back. I guess they did a little better under me. And just one issue after I brought it back, Neil Adams walked in the door and said he'd like to do some, you know, awful, you know, some book that wasn't selling. And so I said, well, we got X-Men. You know, so here it is. And Neil and I had, he doesn't remember, we had met, you know, a couple times previously, but at least once. But, I'd seen his work, really liked it. We got on like a house fire and things, and, I would sort of just give him a little direction and, let him do whatever he wanted to do. I had some ideas, he had more, and he would just do whatever he wanted to do, and we'd sort of tie it together. Go out to lunch, by the end of the lunch, we had some kind of story, and I think those issues, I'm not gonna apologize for those were good issues.
Yeah.
And for both of us.
Truly.
And I think they were rather influential on what happened later that Chris and the other people was doing, and so forth in that sense. But, if we'd done Wolverine, maybe we'd done okay by it, we never had a shot at it.
Ed Piskor, everyone aware of X-Men Grand Design that Ed Piskor is doing? Ed Piskor, a great indie underground comic book artist who has been doing Hip Hop Family Tree, the history of hip hop music through comic books. He's been doing Grand Design, which really distills the X-Men story in very, it's just a few volumes, but it really is the highlights, and it's funny when you mention the Sentinels. I mean, it's things like that that Ed really focuses on. But I want to get back to Logan and also one of your questions. Are there other questions about, sir, in the front?
Kind of a twofold question. I'm not sure how recent in your research for the book you went, but there's the Old Man Logan book going on, and of course the Return of Wolverine, where he magically escaped adamantium. Did you go into that at all with your research? What are your thoughts on the Old Man Logan storyline? And now apparently he's going back and they're going to kill him with that and that sort of thing.
Well, funny thing about
that sort of trauma feeling.
Here's a funny story about Wolverine coming back. So the book was complete, and one of my friends called me and said, "You have to read." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Don't turn it in until you read." So I was like, "Okay." So then, here I am, and I get to the end, I was like, "Crap!" Because I had to, add, another section to it, because sure enough, and the first thought that occurred to me is like, you can't toy with my emotions like this, like we had completion, I had mourning, I went through the grief stages, and now you're doing this to me, and then I'm glad he's back. Acceptance, and then, my world gets turned upside down. I did address the Old Man Logan, which was, of course, the inspiration for the Logan movie in itself, right? It gives like a Western feel, the grittiness, and here's someone who has, I am never going to unsheathe my claws again because, of the damage that he did, which was different than the Logan movie.
Absolutely.
And I'll be fair and honest to say, I think that the Xavier being responsible for the massacre makes more sense to me because he has the power to do that. Like, the other X-Men were pretty powerful too. I don't know if they could, if Wolverine could wipe them all out, so, but, just that notion of guilt and shame, that lives within this, character. And, I remember a conversation with John Romita Jr. where he talked about, his rage, and it occurred after 9/11. And he said that at that moment he wanted to be judge, jury, and executioner, and wanted whoever was responsible. He loves New York, and no one's going to do this to New York. And but he said you have to temper that, with balance and grace because you can't. And he's like, but however Wolverine is, he is judge, jury, and executioner, and that is by far too much for one person to carry. And that, of course, leads credence to the Old Man Logan. Beginning where he's done. He doesn't want to do this anymore.
I also like how, beyond the Mark Miller's miniseries, what they've done with Old Man Logan in the more recent years, and that they are wrapping that up to allow modern-day Wolverine to come back and everything. But I really enjoyed his role in the 616, and again, like you said, carrying that guilt and seeing an alternate universe where the damage hasn't happened yet, but it's almost like knowing that it could happen, and that kind of responsibility. And I understand why it's necessary to go back to modern Wolverine, and I'm all for it, but I have to say, I really did enjoy exploring Old Man Logan beyond those.
So you think they'll leave him in the comics, then? You think
Marvel's not ready to retire? No, I think Old Man Logan will
wrap up.
Well, they're
Yeah.
ending that,
But,
and then
so,
they
so they're,
already.
so they're not gonna let
A dead
Wolverine
man.
go the way of Hugh Jackman.
Probably, well, they might as far as, however they get rid of them, I don't know.
No, what I meant is maybe no more be in the
Yeah.
comics the same way that maybe there will be another Wolverine in the movies, but I think Marvel will kind of hang on to
You
him.
know that.
Yeah.
Come on, right? They can't get rid of the
Come on,
original.
it's being facetious. Get
No,
the-
But
Then you have three going on at the same time.
But it
you know?
is fun because there is that wish fulfillment, and you have a character like Batman where it's like, well, that did Grace be Batman and stuff, and they've done it for a moment, and Azrael certainly, and Danny O'Neill can speak to that. Obviously, Danny will be here, by the way, Sunday, if you guys are here all weekend, so Danny O'Neill's here and can find out about all that. But yeah, and that's why as with Infinity War, and it's great to see, as I'm sure we all feel that way, when we see, forgive the term, mainstream audiences go, but
Right.
Spider-Man's dead!
Right,
What's
right.
gonna happen now? And it's like, and I love all the nerd blogs, here's how they can bring him back. And it's like, really? Come on, man. There's like dozens and hundreds of writers and artists that have been doing it a lot better than Jimmy's blog telling you how Black Panther can come back.
These are the same people that believed Superman was going to die.
Exactly.
You remember DC had this idea out of desperation
Sure.
to do
Absolutely.
the death of Superman, which they had done a couple times before, and they
But only in imaginary stories.
but they you can tell the difference. But when they do it on a slow news day, when they couldn't do it now. There's too much news. But back then, I guess 20 years ago, there's slow news days. All these reporters say, hey, the DC Comics is killing off Superman, and there's going to be no more Superman. And they put it out, and these idiots, go out and buy all these comics, and then of course they're shocked. They think they're going to put their children through school by buying 100 copies of the death of Superman. It was great.
In my research, I just realized that death doesn't stick, right? And there's a lot of brainwashing. Those are the
They
two
get better.
things, right?
They always
Yeah,
they
a
get better.
lot of brainwashing, right? Especially when people go down the aisle, apparently, or something, and they change their mind or something.
You explore, and sir, I will get to your question. You explore, certainly his time at, and I'm blanking, with Stryker and Weapon X. The Weapon X period, the World War II period as well is
Yeah.
certainly mentioned in there.
Yeah, the Weapon X, Barry Windsor-Smith was hard. That was so difficult, and because the only way I was trying to wrap my head around, like, okay, how do I write this in psychological terms? And so I said, okay, it's the psychology of torture, and I had to do research of, what is real, like what actually happens. And so every evening, like I either needed a scotch or a Disney film. Afterwards, I was just like, this is not okay, right? I'm to be taken to a very, very, very dark place because there's a lot of atrocities that do occur. And I knew in my book that Weapon X and the X-Men chapter were going to be controversial. And I can talk about the X-Men thing too later on in a second. But yeah, Weapon X, that is probably my favorite series. Because it goes into like the subconscious mind, and even in his, the state of him being, assaulted and victimized and being experimented on, he wanted to destroy them. You see that rage there and his battle. And I have heard, and I also argue that the Weapon X program probably led to his great humanity because he was fighting against being controlled, like he was fighting for his humanity. So I believe that, that led to the ultimate dualistic nature of the character.
Very cool. Sir, you had a question?
Thanks. I guess that kind of changed my question a little bit because I was curious what you made of that period, and maybe somebody can help me if I get some details wrong. I think it's after he lost his adamantium when he is in this sort of bestial stage, and it's Elektra that sort of helps bring out his humanity. And that was something I was always curious about him, was that he's always found this appeal with Japan and with very structured orders of either ninjutsu or the samurai. And he is sort of interesting in that he is like, if you look at like Plato's tripartite soul, he's mostly appetite and spirit. There's not a lot of reason. And I guess, what is his appeal? Is it the structure of those kind of codes of Japan? What is the appeal?
I can answer then, you'll answer.
Yeah, but you're welcome.
I think it's no pressure. I think it's the honor that he strives for. It's the code of honor and loyalty and discipline. In my book, I also talk about his enemies, and I listed Cyclops as one of them, only because, yeah, it's interesting, right? But I listed him as one because I think that he is envious of the discipline that Cyclops has, and that he perhaps may never acquire on some level. And so perhaps, maybe the Buddhist nature of, like balance or peace or so that's what I think. What do you think?
What she said.
Well, I think there is something to the structure. Well, being able to channel the rage, and the way that a great samurai warrior can go berserker when he needs to, but also, keep it tight when he needs to as well. I wondered also, both of you, and I don't know, Roy, if you've read Greg Rucka's Wolverine run, and Suzanne, I don't know if you've read this one.
I'm sorry.
Okay, because I thought he had a more introspective Logan, which kind of turned off some fans, but I found interesting and stuff. Give me the time caller. My class is running. 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Honestly, that's like right at 6, and we want to give people a chance to come in and see the fonts. So I'm going to say 5 minutes, actually, if that's okay, because you want to give people a chance to come in and the fonts. Yeah, exactly. We're the opening act for Henry Winkler and everything. So, well, and also the romance that kind of ran over because we went right to 5. But anyway.
There's a question.
Please, another question.
John.
Yeah, I have a question. This book sounds very interesting. Where would I go to buy it and purchase it?
Thank you.
Maybe you can show me the book.
What's your name? Here it is.
It's called Untamed,
It's
the
called
Psychology
Untamed,
of Wolverine.
The Psychology of Marvel's Wolverine.
Yeah.
What's your name, kid?
Exactly.
And it is found at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any bookstore.
Yeah, sure.
I had a fight for this title. We were having this conversation because, and you could answer this question better, but my understanding is that there's a derivative of the Greek language that, it means like adamantium, and it's, so it's derivative of adamantium. Or adamantium is untamed, or it's like strength or untamed. And so I had to explain that.
Well, adamantium means like, or unbreakable.
Unbreakable.
Because the thing is, I've said before, maybe I'll just mention where the name came from, since adamantium is such an important part of Wolverine. You probably
Absolutely, right.
Ask about it, but the thing is that back when I was doing Avengers with Barry Smith was drawing a couple of issues that it was the second Ultron storyline, Ultron 6, an infinite number of like go on. And and I wanted to get a metal that would be the most hardest metal you could possibly ever have. Anything else could only be, break up against it. And I needed a name. And I, couldn't think, and I'm not that good at names. I never liked the names I made up. I choose a good one like Wolverine, but I wasn't that good at inventing names as Stan, Jack, and some other people are. But I remembered that I had been, back in the early 60s, when I have it on my shelf at home, I had a particular English language translation of Aeschylus's Greek tragedy, Prometheus Bound.
Oh, sure.
And on the very first page or so, there's also a couple of characters, Kratos and Mia, Force and Might. I made them characters in the Avengers later too. And there's a line in there that Prometheus is brought up to be, so he can be chained up here, and his gizzard will be out eaten every day, and it'll go back, and then they'll get it the next day. And there's talk about that he's bound in adamantine chains. Now I heard the word adamant, but adamantine, I hadn't seen that word before 62 or whatever I saw it. So suddenly it just came to me, adamantine, and then from that it just became adamantine. And my greatest sorrow now is that they can't use that in Marvel Studios movies because it's kind of controlled, it's stuck in the X-Men universe because it's
funny. Well,
because this is the one thing I felt I did better than Stan and Jack. I think adamantium was a better metal name than vibranium. Okay. I'm pretty modest about the rest, but adamantium I accidentally stumbled in something kind of nice.
In case the merger doesn't go through it, I imagine eventually we will be using adamantium.
Yeah, then they'll have a vibranium.
Well, you have to you've got to test the metal against metal, absolutely. Fine. Foregone conclusion, absolutely. Other questions? We've got about 2 minutes left, sir.
An unrelated question to psychology. Since you did so much research into Wolverine, do you like any of the other characters involved with him? Like, what's your next favorite?
Stay tuned. There's another book.
That's awesome.
Oh, and by the way, I'm also signing books here too, so I.
Excellent, good, I'm glad you're getting artists out, that's cool. No, that's great. Yes, please.
What was your favorite part about researching Wolverine in the psychology aspect?
Meeting the writers and the illustrators and the creators.
Nice.
Because that, what I was going to say just very briefly about like the X-Men, like were they meant to be minorities or something? Here's what I would say to that, is that the mind is very complex and the subconscious mind is also very complex. So even if it wasn't conscious, it might have even been subconscious. And I think that, writers and illustrators put, their stuff, they project it onto their characters. Of course, it's inevitable. And so it was meeting them and meeting their stories, and also just it's a different culture and being embraced in this journey. This has been the best part by far.
Well, remember these are two characters that were totally created by a Jewish writer-editor and a Jewish co-plotter artist. Characters with secret identities. Neither one of whom was using the name Paperboard. I mean, there's got to be a lot of stuff in there. So the mere fact that whether, as I said, they recognized or were constantly trying to do it, but as somebody said, and many people said, you can't write writing, you got to write something. And so you dig into whatever you had, and I'm sure that some part of the Jewish experience probably. That's one reason why it worked so well, maybe with some of the Holocaust stuff with Magneto and Professor X, simply because, that came again out of the experience of the two people who really created the X-Men between them.
Absolutely.
That's great. I'm going to wrap up because we want to, again, give people a chance to get to the next panel. The title of the book, again, Untamed, The Psychology of Wolverine. And they're both in Artist Alley. Check it out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you enjoyed this level of conversation, I remember we'll bring that on.
I just want to say one thing. I just want to thank you personally for creating Wolverine and for inspiring millions around the world, and for, in my personal case, in a very surprising way, creating a character that helped change me for the better.
Well,